Welcome to part two of the travel reimbursement case. In an earlier video, part one, we took a look at the setup of the case, um, what the beginning and end steps were, and some of the considerations around scoping. And now we'll lay out the details behind each of the steps that made up travel reimbursement, introduce the concept of cycle time as compared to lead time, and then take a look at some of the characteristics that led to the poor performance. All right, I've cleaned up my screen a little bit and I've started to lay out the steps for travel reimbursement. We know that the total time in the system from the beginning of the first step, the beginning, all the way to the end, and I haven't listed out all of the steps yet, but you can see that there are more here. From the beginning of the first step to the end of the last step, we call that lead time. And our first thought on lead time was that it might be 14 weeks. We were told that was incorrect. That was a 1 in 1,000. Our second observation or anecdotal story said, no, it's more like 2 weeks. Um, so, but we had no data on it, so we had to go out and capture some data, and this is what we found. The first step was form fill out, and it took approximately. This step was performed by the employee traveler themselves, and it was done on a paper-based form at the time. But later on, we're going to find in updates to this case that it was eventually done in a web-based manner. I guess where I'm going with this is anytime you hear the word form, know that it could be paper or it could be web-based. It took about an hour. After I got done filling out the form, I would pass that form to my manager for review. Now, my manager didn't ever take a full hour to do the review, but just to make the math simple, let's say that it never took more than an hour. So this time, instead of the hour being the average, let's call it an hour is the max. Honestly, I'm guessing my manager probably spent no more than a minute actually doing the review for accuracy, but definitely no more than an hour. After my manager got done, he would pass that to corporate. Our corporate accounting and finance group located in Chicago would approve all expenditures, and I'm sure it didn't take them a full hour for the review. Again, we'll call it 1 hour max for them to perform these activities. Each one of the timestamps associated with the yellow activity box is given a name. It's not called lead time, it's called cycle time. So cycle times for each of these would be 1 hour on average, 1 minute on average, but no more than a max for the review, and 1 hour max or 1 minute on average for the approval at corporate. We called these cycle time values. After corporate got done, they would send a special billing code back to each of the branches that they could use in their general ledger systems to enter the information. And that billing code was sent back, and then our local branch accountants, they would do data entry and categorize the information. The time it took to do the data entry and categorizing was right around an hour. It was pretty manual work. They also performed another step, though. So these activities were performed both by the local branch accountants. They would also prepare the electronic record that would get sent to the bank. And to do that also took an additional 1 hour. Our local branch accounting group spent almost 2 hours per transaction or per travel reimbursement request. They really did do a lot of the heavy lifting. And it was for that reason that we chose as the project manager, as the project team leader for this process improvement project, we chose the supervisor for this group. He's the one who had all of that subject matter expertise and said, it takes about 2 weeks to get this thing completed. We found after the electronic record was prepared, that record would be sent to the bank. And the bank would withdraw the fund and create a check. And I know for a couple of you, you're thinking, well, why didn't the bank just do direct deposit? Well, it came back to that ERP system and our general ledger financial tool. In order to get that capability, direct deposit capabilities, we would have had to have updated our ERP system at a price tag of around $120,000, $200,000, and that's the reason why uh, our our CEO, Sue, said, no, you can't touch the ERP system. That's a part of a separate project. In any case, for the bank to withdraw the funds, create the check, and get it sent off, that was about 1 hour as well. After the bank created the check, they would send it to the HR group at the branch. There were different HR professionals at each branch. They would receive all payments, whether it was payroll or travel reimbursement or any type of payment. They'd secure those payments and then distribute to employees. Our distribution was every Friday. We'd either get payroll or travel reimbursement or both. And they'd go around and pass those checks out, and it took about 1 hour. The final step then was for them to distribute, well, they distribute the checks, and after I received it, I would deposit it, and that would take about 1 hour as well. So now with all of the steps laid out, let's just do a quick arithmetic to sum up all of the cycle times. If we add form fill out, review of the review for accuracy, approval of expense, we're now at a maximum of 3 hours. In reality, the review and approval probably took a lot less than an hour, but let's just call it an hour to make the math simple. So we're at 1, 2, 3 hours here. It was 2 hours by the local branch accounting group to do data entry and preparing that e-record. So if we include those, we're at 5 hours, 6 for the bank, 7 for HR, and 8 for me. If we sum up the cycle times, that's 8 hours. But here's the thing. The total lead time in the system, well, when we actually measured and observed the total lead time of a transaction going from the beginning of the first step, form fill out, to the end of the last step, receive and deposit, that total time in the system, well, it wasn't 14 weeks. That was inaccurate. 2 weeks, though, was also inaccurate. It turned out that the average amount of time it took to move through the system was 7 weeks. 7 weeks equated to very frustrated customers. But where did it come from? Because when we add up all the cycle times, that's only 8 hours. And the answer is it was buried in the white space. I'm going to zoom in to explain the white space. I'd fill out the form on a Monday morning, but my manager wouldn't review for accuracy until Friday afternoon. That was 4.5 days of white space, not hours, but days. My manager on Friday afternoon would do the review and send those to corporate, first by fax, later by email. But corporate typically wouldn't review them until not Monday morning, but typically Tuesday or Wednesday. So if that was sent on Friday, Friday 1, Saturday 2, Sunday 3, Monday 4, Tuesday 5. It was typically 5 more days of white space before corporate performed their activities. Now, not all white space is equal. I know it was 4.5 and 5 days here, but when corporate did finally send the approval, it was usually only 1 day or less in the handoff between corporate to the local branch accounting. And it was 0 days for white space in between here. Preparing the e-record and sending it to the bank, again, only took about a day. But between the bank and the HR branch, after the bank cut the check and would send it to the HR branch, that would typically take 2 to 3 days. Let's just call it 2 days to make the math easy. But then from the HR branch to the distribution to employees, well, HR would only do this on Friday. And so if I depending upon when they receive the checks, this could be anywhere from 1 to 5 days. Typically, we'll say 3 more days of white space. White space was the biggest contributing factor. There's more. Because what also contributed to the 7 week total lead time was a rework loop. There was a major rework loop at data entry. Oftentimes, the local accounting folks would find errors, mistakes, or invalid expense types that they were uncertain of, and that would get sent back to the employee. This rework loop would re-trigger all of this white space. Both rework loops and white space accounted for most of the 7 weeks that people were feeling. There was only 8 hours of actual touch time, activity time, but over 7 weeks in total lead time. Add to it the fact that not all of the initiations were the same. There was lots of variation. There was lots of variation upstream. Sometimes folks would make requests for $22 in gas money. Other times, though, there'd be, I remember submitting claims for $5,000 to $10,000. They all got the same level of rigor, whether it was a $22 request or a $10,000 request. Lots of variation in the complexity of the requests. There was also lots of variation downstream because, 7 weeks was the average, but we saw some instances that went out to 14 weeks. But we did see some that were less than 1 week. The average was 7, but lots of variation around that average. The reason why the travel reimbursement case is used is because it's a great example of white space, rework loops, and variation creating lots of frustration in the system. And in future videos, we'll take a look at how this problem was analyzed and resolved.